Hello and welcome to Money for Economics episode 17. In this episode, we'll talk about religion. If you want to get in touch, my email is in the top left corner of the screen. Okay, so in my opinion, I think people should be allowed to worship. There shouldn't be any restrictions on religious groups. I think they should be able to build their own places of study and worship. Um, they should have their own priesthood. They um, should basically be allowed to do what they want to observe their religion. And yes, now in my opinion, also at some point there becomes a question whether should laws be religious, should uh, religious laws take primacy over secular laws. And in my opinion, I think state secular laws should have primacy over religious laws, but obviously not in all cases. So some religious laws can be enforced by participants of a particular religious group on each other, but the state should have um, basically a monopoly to judge people and a monopoly to imprison people, and yeah. Rights should be clearly defined and given to religious groups. There aren't really many restrictions on religious groups that are put down here in this presentation. Um, most of it is just enabling the religious groups to do what they want. Saying, all right, you're free to do this, that, you're free to do whatever you want, but know that like the state is, the state will have primacy over certain aspects. So, this slide shows freedoms. One of the main things here is for the state not to rewrite religious laws. So it's not the state that's determining what a religious law is, it's that community determines what a religious law. It is based on its own precedents, based on its own historical mechanisms for regulating itself as a religious group. So, so I talked about this secular state primacy over religious laws. What I want to add on this slide is that, yeah, so basically, criminal laws are the monopoly of the state. Only state can carry out. Only the state can recommend. Only the courts can recommend. The secular state courts can recommend punishments and enforce the punishments as well, such as imprisonment. Some so while we're not rewriting religions, we have to ban certain things. Well, at least in my opinion, we have to ban some religious laws that are to do with age restrictions. So some religions may allow for marriage at a very young age, and I think that should be prohibited. And as soon as you get there, as soon as you start prohibiting certain religious laws, you become a secular state. Another religious law that has to be banned is slavery. Slavery in today's world can take some very different forms. It can be overt slavery, it can be covert slavery, it could be economic, it could be class based. Um, so such as age restrictions and slavery, those can be banned. Yeah. Um, I talked about having one national court to centralize all justice cases and punishment and um, essentially just processing cases. So if there are um, clear sort of religious laws that are allowed by the secular state, um, those laws will need to be processed. Those religious laws will need to be processed, and they can be processed by the national court. So obviously, the national court could have maybe several hundred justices working on the cases 24/7 or every day, every work day, whatever. But we can have some of these religious groups recommend priests, and those priests will basically have the same power as the secular judges, except to do things that they're allowed to do by the state. Uh, Religious ministers can be prosecuted. So if they commit crimes, if they commit certain, I don't know, but we're talking about real sort of secular state crimes, not sins or religious crimes. These ministers can be prosecuted. So religions, obviously, I think religious groups, they want to eat their food, they want to have their own clothing, they need their own items of prayer, anything to do with religion. They can open their own shops, and as I talked in a previous episode, the statute of their business will work the same way as a non-religious shop. These shops will not be taxed, and they will have to determine where their supply comes from in a statute. There will be the mutual agreement with the state to allow the business to operate. Uh, Obviously, the national industry, religious people can recommend items to be produced for religious groups as normal, obviously. And finally, some religions, they consume gold and silver. Let's say when a baby is born, people buy gold and give it to the parents of that baby. So that's just a very general example, but that gold and silver, it can be bought from outside the country, or it can be distributed from the national mining industry. Priesthood and orders. So priesthoods are not going to be established by the state. They're going to be established by that religious group itself, based on precedents. So if that religious group, for the past, I don't know, several centuries, has a mechanism of promoting priests into offices, then that mechanism will be used, and it won't be the head of state that says, "I want you to lead the Muslims, I want you to lead the Jews, I want you to lead," etc., etc. Foreign priests should be allowed. I think one big thing is for these orders, religious orders. Sometimes a good example of that is some religious orders in some countries, particularly in Europe, they have their own ambulance van brands. Not that we don't want to have private ambulances, but we have to look at whether it would be better to let those ambulances operate, or whether it would be better if that order just donated to the public ambulance system. I think, if I'm not mistaken, some of these societies, they have um, they're related to mercenary corporations, things like that. And if there's a challenge on the state monopoly in policing, military affairs, intelligence, then there should be some orders based prohibiting their that order's operations. Here's a few more things that didn't make it into the presentation. Religion, in my opinion, is a very positive thing. But there's these like sects, and certain sects, they have very uncommon, they're very peculiar interpretations and specifications for worship, and sometimes sectarianism can be deemed as completely different from religion itself. But I think that also has to be considered. And if these sects actually produce any form of victim from their flock, but that has to be looked into. Um, Religious pluralism is great. All religions of the world should be welcome in the country. So as I was saying about sectarianism, there comes a point where there's this clash between the monotheistic religions of the world and the polytheistic religions, and the monotheists, they call these polytheists pagans, heretics, things like that. If that leads to like rioting, or or things like that, I think that has to be you have to protect everyone from that, basically.